There is a particular kind of tiredness that does not want silence. It wants a voice it already knows, a story it has heard before, a world it can walk through with its eyes closed. Adventure Time is unusually good for this. The colors are soft, even when they are bright. The pacing wanders the way a good dream wanders. And the two voices at the center of tonight, Olivia Olson as Marceline and Hynden Walk as Princess Bubblegum, have a warmth that carries through even when you are only half listening. You do not need to follow every word. You already know how it goes. Marceline plays a few notes on that axe bass she made from a family heirloom. Bonnibel bends over some experiment in the Candy Kingdom, and somewhere underneath the adventure, there is 1,000 years of history between them that the series reveals slowly, gently, almost shyly. That history is what tonight is for. This is the complete love story of Marceline and Bubblegum, told from the beginning, in order, quietly enough to fall asleep to. Welcome to Marcy. Settle in wherever you are. Turn the lights down, or turn them off. Find the position you like, the one where your shoulders finally let go, and let the pillow take the weight of your head. There is nothing you need to do from here except listen. We are going to move through this the way you move through the last hour before sleep, without hurry, without anywhere else to be. Marceline was over 1,000 years old before Bonnibel ever handed her that shirt, and we have all the time in the world to get there. So close your eyes, let the voices become the room, and let us begin at the start, long before either of them knew what the other would come to mean. Consider how a show introduces the two characters who will eventually carry its emotional weight, and how rarely it knows, at the moment of introduction, that it is doing so. Adventure Time did not begin with Marceline and Bubblegum standing at the center of anything. It began with a boy and his dog, and the two women arrived separately, years apart, through different doors, drawn by different hands for different reasons. Only in retrospect does the shape become visible. Only later does it seem inevitable that these two would become the relationship the series is now remembered for. Marceline Abadeer entered first as a threat, not a friend. Created by the series creator, Pendleton Ward, she made her first appearance in the Season 1 episode titled Evicted, which reached audiences in 2010. She is not a small figure in its cosmology. The series describes her as being over 1,000 years old, and it gives her a strange, split inheritance. She is half human and half demon, a being who belongs fully to neither world she comes from. That doubleness matters more than it might seem at first. A character who is partly human and partly something ancient and monstrous carries, in her very design, the question of whether she can be trusted, whether she can be loved, whether she is a person or a creature. The show would spend years answering that question, and the answer it eventually gave was one of tenderness. Her voice belongs to Olivia Olson, who performs Marceline across the whole run of the series. There is a detail in the casting that gives the character an odd, private warmth, something you would never guess from watching. Marceline's father in the story, a demonic figure named Hunson Abadeer, is voiced by Martin Olson, who is Olivia Olson's real father. So the tension between Marceline and her father, the pull and the distance and the difficult love of that relationship, is being acted, in the recording booth, by an actual parent and an actual child. I do not want to overstate what that adds, but there is something fitting about a story so preoccupied with inheritance, with what parents pass down to their children, being voiced in part by a real family line. The demon father and the half-demon daughter are, off-screen, simply a father and his daughter. Princess Bubblegum arrived earlier than Marceline, and from an even stranger place. She was also created by Pendleton Ward, and she first appeared not in the series proper, but in the original Adventure Time pilot short, the rough animated test that circulated in 2007, before the series had been picked up, before most of what we now think of as Adventure Time existed. In that pilot, she was voiced by Paige Moss. When the series went into full production, the role passed to Hynden Walch, who has voiced her ever since. So Bubblegum, in a sense, predates the show that contains her. She was there in the earliest sketch of this world, one of the first inhabitants Ward imagined for it. Her full name is Bonnibel Bubblegum, and she is not a passive princess in a tower. She rules the Candy Kingdom, and she is a scientist, one who, the series tells us, created many of the kingdom's citizens herself. Think about what that means as a piece of characterization. The people she governs are, in a real sense, her inventions. She is monarch and maker at once, responsible for her subjects in a way no ordinary ruler is, because she did not inherit them, she built them. And like Marceline, she is far older than she looks. A companion video game once put her age at somewhere around 800 years, and the show's own flashbacks hint she first came into being many centuries ago, even though she still appears to be about 18. Two women then, each carrying centuries behind a young face, each shaped by a long memory the other characters do not share. That alone gives them something in common that no one else in the series can quite reach. So the pieces were on the board early. A 1,000-year-old half-demon musician and an 800-year-old scientist queen, both created by the same person, both older and lonelier than they appear. But pieces on a board are not yet a story. What turned these two separate figures into the emotional core of Adventure Time was not only Pendleton Ward, it was the writers and storyboard artists who came after, and one of them in particular. Rebecca Sugar joined Adventure Time during its first season. She came in as a storyboard revisionist, which is one of the more junior roles in the storyboarding process, the person who cleans up and adjusts the work of others rather than driving it. She did not stay junior for long. She was soon promoted to storyboard artist, and over the seasons that followed, she became one of the show's main writers and storyboard artists, holding that position through season 5. That is a steep and fast climb, and it tells you something about how quickly her sensibility mattered to the people running the show. Her first storyboarding credit came on the season 2 premiere, an episode titled It Came from the Nightosphere, which aired in the fall of 2010. And notice where that first credit lands her. That episode centers on Marceline's father, Abadeer, the demon lord of the Nightosphere. Sugar's first real fingerprint on the series is pressed directly onto Marceline's family, onto the material of inheritance and fathers, and monstrous love that the character was built around. I find that worth pausing on, because it was not an accident of assignment in any meaningful sense, or at least it did not remain one. The writer who would go on to become most associated with the emotional interiority of these characters began her storyboarding career on the episode about Marceline's most difficult relationship. Whatever the series already had in Marceline, a new voice had now been led into the room, and that voice was drawn toward the quieter, more painful questions the character raised. The clearest early meeting point comes in the season 3 episode What Was Missing, which aired on the 26th of September, 2011. This is the episode people return to when they trace the history of Marceline and Bubblegum, and it is worth being precise about who made it, because the making is the point. It was written and storyboarded by Adam Muto and Rebecca Sugar, from a story credited to Mark Banker, Kent Osborne, Patrick McHale, and Pendleton Ward. So the story itself was shaped by 4 people, including Ward, the creator of both women, and then handed to 2 storyboard artists to build into an actual episode, one of whom was Sugar. That is how the show worked. The idea came from one set of hands, and the feeling came from another. A recent look at how Adventure Time changed over its run might frame this episode as a turning point in tone. I would frame it instead as a turning point in authorship, the moment when the people most interested in what these 2 women were to each other were given an episode that put them in the same room. I want to be careful here, because it is easy, knowing what came later, to read intention backward into these early credits, as though everyone always knew where this was going. The verified record does not support that certainty, and I will not pretend it does. What the record supports is quieter and, to me, more interesting. It shows a particular writer, drawn from the start toward the emotional lives of these characters, rising fast through a children's show, and being handed exactly the episodes where Marceline and Bubblegum could be developed. It shows the raw material already present in the character designs, the age, the loneliness, the doubleness, waiting for someone to treat it seriously. And it shows what Sugar did next, which casts everything before it in a certain light. She left Adventure Time in early 2013 to create her own series for Cartoon Network, Steven Universe, which debuted that same year. Steven Universe would become one of the most openly tender and openly queer shows in mainstream American children's animation. That is the person who, a few years earlier, had been storyboarding Marceline's father and building the episode that first put Marceline and Bubblegum together. I offer this as a connection, not as proof of a plan, but the connection is real. The instincts that would later have their own show were already at work here, in the corners of someone else's series, in the choice to take a half-demon girl and a scientist queen and treat what passed between them as something that deserved care. That is where this story begins. Not with a declaration, and not with a kiss, but with two characters built old and lonely by the same creator, and a group of writers, one of them especially, who looked at them and saw more than the show had yet said out loud. The bond that Adventure Time is now defined by did not announce itself in Season 1. It was seated, patiently, in credits and character sheets and the quiet decisions of who got to draw which episode. In the chapters that follow, we will watch it grow. There is a version of this story that people tell from memory, and it goes like this. In the earliest days of Adventure Time, Princess Bubblegum turns Marceline out of a treehouse, and the coldness of that gesture is meant to hint at some long romance already curdled between them, a history it is too shy to state. It is a good story. It is the kind of scene a certain kind of viewer is sure they remember. The trouble is that it does not exist. The episode that first brings Marceline into the world contains no bubblegum at all, no eviction between the two of them, no buried lovers' quarrel. What it contains is something quieter and, I think, more interesting, because of what it does not yet know it is building toward. The episode is called Evicted, and it is the 12th of the first season, the point at which Marceline the Vampire Queen appears in the series for the first time. It was written and storyboarded by Bert Yoon and Sean Jimenez, from a story by Adam Muto, and directed by Larry Licklider. Those names matter here, only because they remind you how early this is. This is a crew still deciding what the show is, sketching a new character with almost no idea of the weight she will one day carry. And so the Marceline they draw is not the one the fandom will fall in love with. She is a problem. She is a threat at the window. She arrives as a silhouette. On a stormy night, Finn glimpses a bat-like shape at his window, a shadow with wings, the shorthand of every monster story ever told to a child in the dark. It is deliberately withholding here. It wants you to read her as a creature before you read her as a person, and for a long stretch of the episode, that reading holds. The reveal, when it comes, is not that she is friendly. It is that she is the tree fort's previous owner, and she has come to reclaim what is hers. Think about what that does to the emotional geometry of the show. The treehouse is home. It is the fixed point Finn and Jake return to. And the first thing this new character does is take it. What follows is structured almost like a fairy tale about dispossession. Finn and Jake, put out of their own home, go house hunting across Ooh, and the episode carries them through it in a musical montage, one temporary hope after another. They even try the Ice Kingdom, and it fails, as of course it would. Because a place ruled by the show's most desperate lonely figure is no shelter for anyone. There is a lightness to this sequence, the comedy of two friends trying doors that will not open, but underneath it runs a real anxiety. They are homeless, the world is large and none of it is theirs. That is a heavier premise than a Season 1 gag episode usually admits to. Eventually they settle into a cave and do the human thing, the hopeful thing. They throw a housewarming party. They decide the cave is home now, and they celebrate it. And Marceline arrives again, and claims the cave is also hers. This is the beat that tells you what she is, at this stage of the story. She is not cruel for sport, exactly, but she is relentless. Wherever they go, she has been there first. She owns the ground under them. The joke and the menace are the same thing, and the episode lets them stay fused. Then the confrontation turns physical, and Marceline transforms into a large demonic bat form, the silhouette from the window made enormous and literal. Here the series is doing something it will do again and again with her over the years, though it does not yet know that. It is showing you her monstrousness plainly, giving you the full frightening shape of what she can become, so that later, whenever her softness appears, it will land against this memory. But that later is not in this episode. In this episode, the bat is just a bat. A wall of teeth and wings bearing down on a small boy who has lost his house twice in one day. And the small boy stands up to her. Finn faces the demon and lands a blow, and the whole thing turns on that single act of nerve. Marceline decides he is fun. She spares him, and she gives the original tree fort back to Finn and Jake, restoring the home she took at the start. That is the resolution, and it is worth sitting with how strange it is as a piece of character writing. Her entire arc in the episode is decided by a test she never announced. She was not truly trying to ruin them. She was, in some sense, playing, and she wanted to see whether the boy would fold or fight. When he fights, he passes, and the game is over. This is Marceline as a trickster, a figure who torments you to find out who you are, and who rewards courage rather than obedience. The romance, the melancholy, the centuries of grief it will eventually hang on her, none of it is here. What is here is the play. I want to be careful about the foreshadowing, because it is easy to cheat with hindsight. It would be dishonest to tell you this episode plants seeds of the Bubblegum relationship, because it does not. Bubblegum is simply absent. The conflict is Marceline against Finn and Jake, start to finish, with no scene that so much as gestures at another woman in her past. If you go back to this episode looking for the great love story, you will find nothing, and I think the nothing is the point. The series introduced its most emotionally complicated future character as a straightforward antagonist, and gave itself years to complicate her. Whatever history you feel radiating off later scenes was not baked in from the beginning. It was built afterward, retroactively, and the earliest appearance stands almost innocent of it. The foreshadowing, if there is any, lives entirely in us. We carry the later Marceline back to this window and lay her over the bat, and the bat does not know she is being read that way. There is one more thing the episode does, and it is a genuinely peculiar note to end a home restoration story on. Once Finn and Jake have their tree fort back, the house is found to be infested with worms, and King Worm hypnotizes them into hugging him, the two friends drawn helplessly into an embrace they did not choose. And then the episode simply stops. It is a cliffhanger, and a real one, the kind that trusts the audience to hold a question in their heads. That question was not answered for a very long time. It waited until the 4th season, until the episode called King Worm, before it returned to what it had left dangling. Consider the confidence in that. A first-season episode ends on an unresolved image and lets it sit for years, and the resolution, when it finally comes, arrives in a completely different register of the show than the one that posed the question. So this is where Marceline begins, not as a lover, not as a tragedy, not as anyone's ex. She begins as a shadow at the glass who owns everything you thought was yours, who turns into a monster to see if you will run, and who hands your home back the moment you prove you will not. Everything else, all the ache and the history the audience is so sure they remember, is a later invention laid gently over this simpler, sharper first sketch. And the honest way to read the beginning is to let it be the beginning, and to notice that the story people tell about it is a story the show had not yet decided to tell. There is a moment in the 3rd season of Adventure Time when the show stops hinting and begins, quietly, to say something out loud. The episode is called What Was Missing, the 10th of that season, and it first aired on Cartoon Network in the autumn of 2011. Most of what people remember about that half hour is the music. What matters for this chapter is a single song, and the person it is aimed at, because for the first time the evidence stops being a look or a silence and becomes language. Marceline sings, and she sings at Princess Bubblegum, and the words carry the weight of something that has already happened between them. Consider how she opens the wound. "Sorry I do not treat you like a goddess," she sings, and then, "Sorry I am not made of sugar, am I not sweet enough for you?" Read those 2 lines slowly. They are apologies in shape only. The word sorry sits at the front of each, but nothing about the delivery asks for forgiveness. Instead, the apology is turned into an accusation, the way people speak when they have rehearsed a grievance for a long time and finally have the person in front of them. To be sweet enough, to be made of sugar, is to be Bubblegum's kind of thing, and Marceline is naming the exact standard she believes she has failed to meet. You do not phrase a complaint that precisely about a stranger. You phrase it that way about someone you once tried, and failed, to please. The refrain is where the hurt becomes structural rather than passing. "Well, I am just your problem," she sings. And then the line that gives the whole scene its ache, "It is like I am not even a person, am I? I am just your problem." She sings this while staring at Bubblegum, and the staring is not incidental. To be reduced from a person to a problem is a very specific kind of diminishment. It is the language of someone who feels they were once close enough to be a person to the other, and who now feels filed away, managed, kept at a distance. Consider what that amounts to as a claim. It is not the grievance of a rival or a colleague. It is the grievance of intimacy that curdled. And then the song does something more honest than anger usually allows. Marceline sings, "I should not have to be the one that makes up with you. which is a line drawn in the sand, a statement of pride, a refusal to be the one who apologizes first. But she does not stop there. She follows it immediately with, "So why do I want to? Why do I want to?" That repetition is the crack in the armor. In the space of 2 lines, she moves from the principle of the thing, that she should not have to reconcile, to the helpless truth underneath it, that she wants to anyway and cannot understand why. The whole contradiction of a person still tied to someone they are furious with lives in those 4 short phrases. She is angry, and she is not finished, and both are true at once. There is an accusation folded into the song that sharpens the picture further. "Is that why you always avoid me?" she sings. "That must be such an inconvenience to you." Avoidance is the charge. Not cruelty, not betrayal in some dramatic single act, but the slow, continual turning away of one person from another. And notice the word always. This is not a complaint about a single snub. It describes a pattern, a habit of distance that Marceline has felt often enough to name it as a constant. The sarcasm about inconvenience echoes the earlier line about being just a problem. In her account, she has become a thing Bubblegum steps around rather than a person Bubblegum meets. That is a wound that only forms over time, and only between people who were once meant to be closer than that. Then the song loses its grip on itself. Marceline's imagery turns aggressive, even violent. She sings of wanting to bury Bubblegum in the ground, of drinking the blood from her, and she catches herself before the last line finishes. Bubblegum responds, telling her, in effect, that this is too distasteful, and Marceline's answer is the sharpest turn in the whole scene. "Or do you just not like me?" she snaps. Look at what she does there. Bubblegum criticizes the content of the song, its ugliness, its violence, and Marceline immediately reroutes the criticism into the personal. She hears a comment about taste, and answers as though it were a comment about her worth. That reflex only makes sense from someone for whom this argument was never about a song. Every objection Bubblegum raises, Marceline receives as rejection. The distaste is not the point. The not liking is the point, and she says so. There is a detail in the staging that deserves attention, because Adventure Time rarely lets its emotional logic go unmatched by its plot. The song is being sung for a reason. There is a door, held by a figure the episode calls the Door Lord, and the music is meant to open it, and it is working. You can see the door respond as Marceline performs. The magic is doing its job, and then Marceline throws it all away by staring at Bubblegum, and the spell breaks, and the momentum of the song collapses. Sit with that for a moment. The performance succeeds as long as it stays a performance. The instant it becomes personal, the instant Marceline stops singing to open a door and starts singing at the woman in front of her, the function fails. The feeling overwhelms the task. It is telling you, through its own mechanics, that this was never really about the door. It is worth being careful here, because carefulness is what makes this reading trustworthy. The scene never states outright that Marceline and Bubblegum were once together. No one says the word. There is no flashback in this episode confirming it, no line of narration settling the matter. What the scene gives you is a song, directed at Bubblegum, in the language of personal betrayal, of avoidance, of unwanted distance, of an intimacy that has soured into resentment. Everything is aimed, nothing is idle. And so the honest thing to say is not that the episode confirms a breakup, but that it becomes, for the first time, hard textual evidence, words on the record, rather than glances open to interpretation. Before this, a viewer could read the tension between the two however they liked. After this song, the most natural reading, the one the words themselves push you toward, is that these two have a history, and that the history hurt. It still does not spell it out. It simply makes it very difficult to believe anything else. There is an image the episode gives you before it gives you anything about Marceline, and it repays attention, because it sets the terms for everything that follows. Princess Bubblegum stands before her elite Candy Kingdom soldiers, demonstrating a new defense system she has installed inside the Gumball Guardians, those enormous silent sentinels who watch over her kingdom. The system releases sleeping gas, and rather than simply arming her soldiers against it, she is teaching them to resist the gas through willpower alone, to stay awake, and standing through something designed to put them under. Think about what that reveals about her, before she has spoken a single word to the person this chapter is really about. Her instinct, always, is to meet a threat by hardening against it, by training the body and the mind to refuse what is pulling at them. Resistance is her native language. That matters, because the whole rest of the night will ask her to speak the opposite one. Marceline arrives late, the way she tends to arrive, and asks Bubblegum to hang out. On the surface, it is a small and ordinary request, two people who have drifted apart proposing to close the distance for an evening. But it is not the true request, and the episode is honest about this from the start. Marceline's real purpose is to get Bubblegum's help tracking down Maja the Sky Witch. She has already done the hard part of the hunt herself. She tells Bubblegum that she tailed Maja to an enchanted forest, a place sealed off by barrier spells, and she names the obstacle specifically, a sleeping gate bramble, something built to stop anyone who tries to force their way through. Bubblegum, for her part, hears the invitation and not the mission underneath it. She misreads the whole thing, and the misreading is tender rather than foolish. She says, in effect, that she thought it would be nice, offering the line plainly, that she just thought it would be cool to spend some quality time together. There is a small ache in that. Here is a woman who governs a kingdom, who trains soldiers to resist sleeping gas by force of will, and when an old friend appears at her door in the dark, the first thing she reaches for is not suspicion but hope. She wants it to be about them. She does not yet know that it is about a teddy bear, and that the teddy bear is the whole reason the door was knocked on at all. So they go, and the first real test of the night is not a monster or a spell to be broken, but a puzzle about temperament. The sleeping gate bramble cannot be fought through. Bubblegum, the strategist, works this out and names the solution, and the naming is the quiet heart of the episode's design. She determines that they must take the path of least resistance, staying calm and passive rather than struggling, letting the barrier pass over them rather than pushing against it. Consider how far that is from the woman we met in the opening scene. In the throne room, she was teaching her soldiers to resist the gas. In the forest, she must teach herself to do the opposite, to stop resisting entirely, to go soft and still, and let the thing wash through her without a fight. The episode has folded its two halves together with real elegance. The gate does not test strength. It tests whether these two people can lower their guard, which is precisely the thing that has been hardest between them for years. They make it through, which tells you something before the story confirms it. Whatever else is broken, they are still capable, together, of the kind of stillness that the gate demands. Inside Maja's lair, the reason for all of it finally appears. Marceline is reunited with Hambo, her childhood teddy bear, the small ragged thing she has carried through a life longer than most. And in this moment, Hambo seems to speak to her. He appears to ask what took her so long, whether the bear truly talks, or whether Marceline is hearing what a lifetime of love wants her to hear, is left deliberately uncertain, and the uncertainty is the point. To Marceline, in that instant, Hambo is alive. He is not an object recovered from a hoard. He is a presence that has been waiting, and that has finally been reached. Bubblegum does not see it that way. And here the night turns from cooperation to friction. She doubts. She tells Marceline not to be dense, that Hambo cannot even talk, and the flatness of the line lands like a small cruelty, even though it is meant as plain sense. From Bubblegum's vantage, this is simple truth, the observation of a scientist who deals in what can be measured. From Marceline's vantage, it is a denial of the one thing that made the entire journey worth undertaking. The gap between them, in that exchange, is not really about a toy. It is about two ways of moving through the world. One that trusts feeling as its own kind of evidence, and one that trusts only what it can verify, and the episode does not pretend the gap is easily closed. And then Marceline confesses, which is the moment the friendship actually begins to repair, though it does not feel like repair while it happens. She admits that finding Maja was always about rescuing Hambo, that the invitation to hang out was cover, that she had not told Bubblegum the real reason because she worried that if she had, Bubblegum would not have come. Sit with the weight of that admission for a moment. It is not flattering to either of them. It says that Marceline did not trust the friendship to hold the real request, that she thought she had to smuggle her need in under the disguise of casual company. But the confession itself is the repair, because it drags the truth into the open where the two of them can finally look at it together. You cannot mend something while one person is still hiding the thing that needs mending. Bubblegum's response is the most revealing thing she does all night. and it is easy to misread it as cold when it is closer to the opposite. She tries to solve the problem the only way she knows how. She offers to have Raggedy Princess sew Marceline a replacement Hambo. When that does not land, she offers something more startling, to become Marceline's new Hambo herself, to step into the role and be the comfort the bear provided. There is a real generosity buried in that, and also a real blindness. Bubblegum is treating Hambo as a function, a source of comfort that could be supplied by another source, when to Marceline he is not a function at all, but a particular irreplaceable thing. Marceline refuses. She insists that there is only one Hambo, and with that line the episode draws the boundary between the two women as clearly as it ever will. One of them believes love can be manufactured to specification. The other knows that some things are singular, and that a copy, however lovingly stitched, is not the thing itself. It would be easy to read that refusal as a rejection of Bubblegum, but I do not think it is, and I think the story agrees. Marceline is not pushing her friend away. She is telling her the truth about what matters, which is a thing you only bother to do with people you have decided to keep. The offer and the refusal are both, in their clumsy way, acts of care. The plot does not let them rest in the feeling for long. Maja's Crabbit familiar, the witch's strange servant, steals Bubblegum's backpack and flies off with Hambo inside it, and the two of them are forced back into partnership by the theft. They track the creature by following a trail of broken branches through the forest, and there is something fitting in that. Earlier the night rewarded stillness, the refusal to force a path. Now the path is marked by force, by everything the Crabbit snapped and shoved aside in its flight, and the two women read that violence like a map. They have moved from passing softly through a barrier to hunting along the wreckage of a passage, and they do it side by side without argument now, the confession behind them, the mission finally shared honestly. And in Maja's hoard of stolen things, among all the objects the witch has gathered and kept, Bubblegum finds something private, a box, and inside it a receipt. The receipt shows that Maja purchased Hambo, and it names the seller, a figure called Ash. The story does not, in this chapter, tell you who Ash is or what that name will come to mean. It simply lets the paper exist, a small documented fact sitting in a box in a witch's collection, evidence that Hambo did not merely wander into Maja's hands, but was sold there, by someone. Bubblegum, the woman who trusts what can be verified, is the one who finds the proof. It is a quiet thing to end on, a receipt in a box, but it reframes the entire rescue. Somewhere behind Marceline's loss, there was a transaction, and a name, and a betrayal she does not yet fully understand. Consider what it means to learn a large truth about someone you love from the wrong mouth. In Season 7, in the episode called Varmints, Marceline flies to the Candy Kingdom at night with a small and tender plan. She intends to invite Bubblegum along on what she thinks of as a midnight squeezy mart run, the kind of low, ordinary errand that only close friends bother to share. What she finds instead is a stranger, someone she does not know, standing where the ruler of the kingdom should be, announcing himself with the words, "It is I, the one true princess of Oo." The scene is played for comedy, and it is genuinely funny, but underneath the comedy is a small collapse. The person Marceline came to see is simply gone, and no one told her. The stranger fills the silence with information that should have come from somewhere gentler. He tells Marceline that Bubblegum has, in his phrasing, exiled herself to a sad cabin on the shores of Lake Butterscotch. He claims to have ruled for what he calls 2 glorious months, measured against a calendar he has invented for himself and named the New Torontian Calendar. Every detail of this is absurd, and the series knows it is absurd, and yet the absurdity does not soften the blow so much as sharpen it. Marceline is being handed the most important news of her recent life by a person who keeps a private calendar and speaks of himself as a princess. The messenger is a joke, and the message is real. Then, as Peppermint Butler hustles Marceline away, the stranger shouts one last thing after her. He calls out, "Tell Bubblegum I wear her nightgown. Tell everyone." It is the kind of line that lands as pure comic nonsense in the moment, a final flourish of the intruder's strange confidence. But listen to it again with Marceline's ears. She has come looking for intimacy, for a small shared night, and she is leaving with the image of a fraud in Bubblegum's clothes, broadcasting a false closeness to the whole world. The thing Marceline wanted for herself is being announced loudly by someone who has no right to it. So she does the only thing that makes sense for her. She flies straight to the cabin, and here the episode makes a choice that tells you what it is really about. Marceline is not angry that Bubblegum left the throne. She is angry that she had to hear about it from, in her own words, that wax fraud, instead of from Bubblegum herself. Think about what that distinguishes. There is the political fact, the vacancy of a crown, and there is the personal wound, the silence of a friend. Marceline does not care about the first, she cares entirely about the second. The whole engine of her anger is not what happened, but who failed to tell her. At the cabin, before anything real can be said, there is a small gesture that is easy to miss. Bubblegum turns to her attendant and says, "Give us a minute, Peppermint Butler." It is a short line, 4 words of ordinary politeness, and yet, it does a specific kind of work. Bubblegum is clearing the room. She is making a private space for a private conversation, signaling without announcing it that what she is about to say to Marceline is not for other ears. For a character who has spent so much of the series managing appearances and audiences, the instinct to dismiss the witness before speaking honestly is worth sitting with. She wants to be alone with Marceline. That desire, small as it looks, is the shape of the whole episode. What she then admits is unusually plain for her. She clarifies that she was not, in the language the series uses, throne-jacked. No one stole her crown. She quit it herself. She walked away from the throne by her own decision, and the strange intruder simply wandered into the empty seat afterward. And then Bubblegum says the thing that costs her something. She admits she should have told Marceline, and that the reason she did not was that she was embarrassed. That is the confession under the comedy. Not that she made a hard choice, but that she hid it out of shame, and in hiding it she let Marceline learn the truth from a fool. The apology is not for leaving, it is for the silence Marceline flew all this way to protest. Bubblegum describes what she has built out here, and the scale of it is almost touching in its smallness. She has started what she calls a new kingdom at the cabin, and this new kingdom consists of exactly 2 subjects, herself and Peppermint Butler. This is the great mind of the Candy Kingdom, the strategist and scientist, reducing her domain to a garden and a single servant. And even this tiny kingdom has a problem she cannot solve alone. She complains that varmints have been raiding her pumpkin patch every night, coming out of the dark to take what she has grown. The ruler who once managed an entire population is now losing a nightly battle over pumpkins. There is something humbling in that image, a person who has stripped her life down and still finds the world pressing in at the edges. Marceline's response to all of this is the answer the episode has been waiting for. She does not lecture. She does not extend the argument about the silence, though she would be within her rights to. She simply says, "Let's get these varmints," and agrees to help fight them off that very night. Watch what has happened in the space of a single scene. Marceline arrived furious, wounded by being left out. And the moment Bubblegum tells the truth and admits the embarrassment, Marceline folds the anger away and steps directly into the work beside her. The reconciliation is not spoken, it is enacted. To forgive Bubblegum, Marceline picks up the same fight Bubblegum has been losing alone. Being let back in is the whole apology she needed, and she takes it by staying. The fight itself becomes an act of discovery, which is the episode's quiet cleverness. Chasing the varmints, the 2 of them find a varmint hole, a passage in the ground, and it leads down into a delivery tunnel from the old rock candy mines. They say it themselves, that they have not been down here in hundreds of years, so the pursuit of a nightly nuisance turns, without anyone planning it, into a descent into their own shared past. The pumpkin patch was the present-day irritation. The tunnel is what lies underneath it, literally and otherwise. To solve the small problem of the varmints, they have to go back down into a place that only the 2 of them remember. And in that place they find a piece of that memory made visible. There is graffiti on the wall, a tag Marceline made when she was a kid. Bubblegum remembers the moment attached to it. She recalls catching Marceline in the act, describing it as vandalizing the mines, the princess playing enforcer against the wild girl with the spray. But Marceline corrects the memory, or rather completes it. She reminds Bubblegum that she did not just get caught, she got Bubblegum to tag something too. The story Bubblegum tells is the respectable one, the ruler disapproving of the delinquent. The story Marceline restores is the truer one, in which the ruler was pulled across the line and made complicit, made playful, made young for a moment. Even hundreds of years ago, Marceline's role in Bubblegum's life was to get her to break her own rules a little. Then comes the smallest and most revealing beat of the whole episode. Marceline reads Bubblegum's old handwriting on the tag, the letters she made when she was young and unguarded, and she calls it really pretty. And the instant the words are out, she backtracks. She becomes embarrassed and says, in effect, that she did not mean it that way, insisting, it's not that. Nothing has been declared. No confession has been made. But the whole architecture of these two characters is standing right there in that flinch. Marceline sees something tender in Bubblegum, says so honestly, and then panics at how honest she has just been. The affection is real enough that it slips out on its own, and self-conscious enough that she has to snatch it back. If you want to understand the entire long ache between these two, you could do worse than to watch Marceline compliment old handwriting and then apologize for the compliment. Consider how far the episode has traveled without ever raising its voice. It begins with a stranger in a stolen seat shouting nonsense, and it ends with two old friends standing in a tunnel neither has visited in centuries, looking at proof that they were once close enough to vandalize a mine together. The anger about the silence, the confession of embarrassment, the shared fight, the buried past, and finally that one honest word quickly taken back. None of it is loud, all of it is intimate. The episode understands that the real news was never about a throne at all. It was about who gets told, who gets let in, and how much it still costs Marceline to say something kind out loud. There is a request Marceline makes of Princess Bubblegum near the start of the Stakes miniseries that carries more weight than its plain words suggest. She asks Bubblegum to perform what the series simply calls the procedure, a cure for vampirism, and she says it flatly, without ceremony. She does not want to be a vampire anymore. Consider how strange it is to hear that from a character the series has spent years building into an emblem of cool immortality, someone who flies and shrugs and treats the centuries as a long, indifferent afternoon. The line is short. What sits underneath it is the whole reason this chapter of her life needs telling. Marceline explains herself to Bubblegum, and the explanation is where the miniseries plants its true subject. She became a vampire, she says, as a messed up kid, after bad things happened to her. And now, 1,000 years later, she is still messed up. That is the part worth slowing down on. She does not describe immortality as freedom or as a curse in the melodramatic sense. She describes it as a state of arrest, of being frozen at the worst version of herself, unable to move past the wound that made her. She does not want to spend eternity carrying what she calls this emptiness. She wants, in the plainest possible terms, to grow up. Weigh what that longing means for a being who has already lived 10 lifetimes and yet feels she has never been allowed to age out of her own damage. Bubblegum's answer to this is the first sign of how far she has already gone. The machine is built. The serums are ready. She has, in other words, done the work in advance, before being asked, which tells you something about the shape of her attention toward Marceline. But she is also honest in a way that costs her. This operation, she admits, might not even work. She does not soften it or oversell the science. A lesser writing of the scene would have Bubblegum promise a happy result to comfort her friend. Instead, she offers the truth of an experiment, which is that experiments fail, and she lets Marceline decide with that risk in full view. Then comes the warning that reframes everything. Bubblegum tells Marceline that if the cure succeeds, she will eventually die of natural causes. This is not a side effect. It is the entire meaning of the cure. To become mortal is to accept death, and Bubblegum makes sure Marceline understands that the reward and the price are the same thing. And Marceline accepts it. She calls it her last adventure, which is a phrase both light and unbearably heavy, the kind of joke a person makes when they have already made peace with the sentence inside it. She is choosing an ending. She is choosing to be the sort of creature that ends. Bubblegum takes the weight of that choice one step further, and this is the moment the miniseries reveals the depth of what she is willing to carry. She tells Marceline that when she eventually dies as a mortal, she, Bubblegum, will be the one who puts her in the ground. Hold that image for a moment in the quiet. It is not a promise of a cure, it is a promise of a burial. Bubblegum is telling Marceline that she will outlive her, that she will stand at the grave, that she will perform the last physical act of love for someone she is about to make capable of dying. There is a version of devotion that says, "I will keep you alive forever." This is the other version, rarer and harder, that says, "I will let you go, and I will be there when you are gone." To grant Marceline the mortality she wants, Bubblegum has to agree to lose her. She agrees. The procedure itself is rendered with a strange, clinical calm. Bubblegum extracts what she names Marceline's vampire effluvium, drawing it out of her and collecting it in a bucket, and she tells Marceline that they will not know the results for a couple of days. She instructs her to rest while she checks her vitals. It is quiet, careful, almost domestic in its attentiveness, one person watching over the sleeping body of another. And this is precisely why what follows lands as it does. The care is real. The competence is real, and neither of them is enough to prevent what the extraction has set loose. The night after the procedure, the village wakes to a wound of its own. Farm animals across it, cows and goats and ducks, are found drained of blood. The suspicion is immediate, and it points in one direction. Villagers turn toward Marceline, and Jake shares the suspicion, which is worth noting, because Jake usually sits close to Marceline in the group's affections. Finn is the one who refuses the easy conclusion. He insists on a proper investigation before anyone is arrested, holding the line against the oldest reflex there is, the reflex to find the monster you already fear and blame the thing you do not understand. In a story about a person trying to stop being a monster, the crowd's rush to name her one is devastating. The cruelest part is that Marceline cannot clear herself, because she does not know. She is not sure whether she is responsible. She says she had a weird dream that night, and she is still uncertain whether the cure even worked. There is a small, precise image of her reacting cautiously to sunlight at the door, testing herself against the one thing that would tell her what she now is. She does not know her own body. She does not know if the emptiness she wanted gone is gone, or if it slipped out of her in the night and went hunting. The horror here is internal. It is the horror of not being able to trust the shape of your own hands. By the following episode, the uncertainty resolves, and the answer is both a relief and a new dread. The cure worked. Marceline confirms it, and she confirms it through loss, testing herself and finding the powers absent. She cannot fly anymore. "Guess I am walking," she says. No more powers, and the joke again does the work of grief, because flight was never only a convenience for her. It was part of how she moved through the world above everyone else, above time. Now she is on the ground with the mortals. And she notes, with a chill, that her cure happened around the same time old vampires reappeared in U. The two facts arrive together, and the series lets us feel the arithmetic before it states it. Bubblegum states it. She reveals that she kept the vampiric material extracted from Marceline, storing it in what she calls a safety bucket. And Peppermint Butler describes what happened inside that container. Multiple distinct creature shapes forming within it, which carries the unmistakable implication that the resurrected vampires of U emerged from Marceline's own extracted essence. This is the twist the whole cure arc turns on, and it deepens the portrait of Bubblegum rather than simply indicting her. She did not throw the effluvium away. She contained it, labeled it, kept it, because her instinct is always to preserve rather than to destroy, to study rather than to discard. That instinct is what saved Marceline, and it is also, arguably, what loosed the vampires. Her care and her hubris are the same traits seen from two angles. Around this revelation stands another figure who prepared in secret, and the miniseries treats him with surprising fairness. Peppermint Butler admits that he has stockpiled high-tech vampire hunting weapons, a two-pronged stake, a stake boomerang, a garlic bomb, and he admits why. He built them specifically in case Marceline ever turned on the group. It would be easy to read this as betrayal, as a friend arming himself against a friend. Marceline does not read it that way. She concedes that he was right to prepare. That concession is remarkable, and it is very much her. She has just spent the arc afraid of what might be sleeping inside her, unsure whether she drained those animals in the night, and so she understands better than anyone that love and precaution are not opposites. Someone who truly cares about a person and a kingdom might do both, hold her close and quietly forge the stake. The show lets that contradiction stand without resolving it into something comfortable. Then the war Marceline has chosen begins to define her. The Vampire King speaks to her, and names the thing hanging over all of it. She has power now, he tells her, but she has not paid a price for it. It is a strange accusation coming from him, and yet it lodges. Because price and payment have been the currency of this entire story, the price of the cure being death, the price of Bubblegum's care being loss, the price of the effluvium being a village of drained animals and a resurgent species. Marceline's response is not defense but declaration. She confirms that her plan is to wipe out his entire vampire species. She, who wanted only to stop being a vampire, becomes the one who intends to end all of them. The personal cure has become an extermination, and you can feel how the one grew out of the other, how the desire to kill the monster in herself expanded outward until it took in the whole kind. And in the middle of that campaign, the series returns to the oldest bond in Marceline's life, the one recent tellings have circled from the direction of madness rather than devotion. Simon, the man beneath the Ice King, falls under the hypnotic control of a vampire called the Empress. Marceline reaches him the only way anyone ever reaches Simon, through memory. She gets him to recall his human life, the time when he protected her and hunted vampires, and as those memories surface, he visibly struggles against the Empress's commands. Watch what the scene proposes about him. His deepest self, the self buried under 1,000 years of the crown's ruin, is a self that guarded her and fought the very things now trying to use him. The love came first. It sits under the illness like bedrock, and when Marceline calls it up, it fights on her behalf even against a will that is not his own. So the Stakes miniseries, read through Bubblegum, is a study of the forms devotion takes when it refuses easy comfort. She builds the machine before she is asked. She tells the truth about the risk. She agrees to bury the person she is curing. She keeps the dangerous remnant because discarding it is not in her nature, and that keeping becomes its own catastrophe. How far will Bubblegum go for Marceline? She will go as far as the grave, and she will accept that her care and her miscalculation cannot be separated. That is not the neat kindness of a fairy tale. It is the difficult, contradictory devotion of someone who loves a person enough to help them die, and who lives with everything that decision sets loose. Consider what the Elements miniseries does to the two figures at the center of this show's longest love story, and consider that it does the cruelest possible thing. It does not separate them by distance or by death. It separates them by transformation. In the opening chapter, the one called Skyhooks, Princess Bubblegum is transformed into a giant candy spire, physically becoming what the series names a candy elemental, fused with the Candy Kingdom's tower until she is no longer a person standing in a place, but the place itself, made monstrous and enormous, and no longer quite able to hear anyone below her. Measure what that means for a character whose entire arc has been about control, about ruling well, about deciding what her kingdom should be. Here, her will and the kingdom's substance become the same material. There is no longer a line between the ruler and the ruled, between the maker and the made. And in that same episode, the elemental magic reaches Marceline as well, and turns her into Marshmalline the Campfire Queen, a marshmallow creature with an unnaturally sweet, upbeat personality, unlike her usual self. This is the detail that undoes the neat story we might want to tell about this chapter. We come to the Elements arc expecting, perhaps, that Marceline will become the protector, that the roles will reverse, and she will be the one to stand guard over a Bubblegum who cannot protect herself. That expectation is not wrong exactly, but the miniseries refuses to hand it to us cleanly. Marceline is not left standing outside the spell as a rescuer. She is caught inside it too, sweetened, flattened, made pleasant. The magic that hardens Bubblegum into candy softens Marceline into marshmallow, and both of those are the wrong shape for who they are. There is a real cruelty in the specific forms chosen. Bubblegum, who is sharp and calculating and often willing to be cold, becomes an immense candy structure. Marceline, who is guarded and prickly and slow to trust, becomes relentlessly, artificially cheerful. Each is turned into a version of themselves, stripped of the very edges that make them recognizable. The corruption does not simply attack them. It caricatures them. It takes the flavor each one is associated with and pushes it past the point of meaning, so that the Candy Princess is nothing but candy, and the Campfire Queen is nothing but warmth. What is lost, in both cases, is the friction, the self, the difficult interior that made them worth loving in the first place. The show establishes early how far this goes for anyone who resists. When Finn criticizes what Bubblegum has done to the kingdom, she begins turning him, Jake, and Bimo into candy, and this is the moment that gives the first episode its title. Finn and Jake escape by grabbing hooks that fall from the sky. The sky hooks themselves, plucked up out of danger at the last second. Bimo does not make it. Bimo is fully candified, converted whole into the substance of the corrupted kingdom. So the arc opens with a friend transformed against his will by the person who once protected him, and with the heroes escaping not through cleverness or strength, but by grabbing whatever descends from above. Notice how helpless that image is. They do not win the first round, they are lifted out of it. Beneath the transformations there is a cause, and the second episode, Bespoken For, begins to show it. The ice elemental Patient St. Pim is revealed freezing Betty and using Princess Bubblegum, Flame Princess, and Slime Princess as hypnotized conduits in an elemental spell circle. Understand the architecture of this. The three princesses, Candy and Fire and Slime, are not simply victims scattered across the land. They are being made into components of a single working, points on a circle, channels for a power that is not their own. Bubblegum's transformation into the candy elemental is not an accident or an illness. It is a function she has been forced to perform. She has been made into a conduit, hypnotized, spoken for, which is exactly what the episode's title names. The one whose defining trait is that she decides for herself has been reduced to a node in someone else's spell. Patience St. Pim herself carries the long memory the series is fond of. She is an ice elemental who lived before the Great Mushroom War and froze herself in the ocean to survive the cataclysm, sleeping through the end of the old world, and she was later found and freed by Finn and Jake in the Ice King's castle. There is a grim symmetry in that. The heroes who spend this arc trying to undo a frozen, crystallized corruption are the same ones who, earlier, thawed the being now orchestrating it. The past in this show does not stay buried. It gets dug up, freed, and set loose on the present, and the people who freed it rarely understand what they have done until much later. Much of the middle of the miniseries becomes a scattering, the heroes sent in different directions to gather what is needed. In Winter Light, the fourth part, Finn, Jake, and the Ice King travel to the ice world and break through the large ice dome covering the center of the land, forcing their way into the frozen heart of the corruption. In Cloudy, the part that follows, Finn and Jake get separated from Betty and the Ice King after taking a nap, and must find their way back, a small, almost domestic kind of lostness set inside the larger emergency. Then the errand becomes explicit. In Slime Central, Finn and Jake travel to the Slime Kingdom to gather Slime Princess's elemental gem, one of 4 gems needed to save Ooh. And in Happy Warrior, Finn and Lumpy Space Princess travel to the Fire Kingdom, which has become even hotter than before, to gather the Flame Jewel. Notice the rhythm of these middle chapters, and notice how it works for a listener drifting towards sleep. The world-ending stakes get broken down into small, concrete tasks. Go to the ice, go to the slime, go to the fire, gather this gem, then that jewel. A cosmic corruption becomes a list of places to visit and objects to collect, and the heroes move through it almost methodically, one kingdom at a time. It is the show's way of making an apocalypse walkable, and through all of it, Bubblegum remains the spire, remains a fixed point of the disaster rather than a participant in fixing it, held in place while everyone else moves. The frame we started with, the idea that Marceline becomes the protector, has to be read against this whole shape, and I think the honest reading is more interesting than the simple one. Marceline does not save Bubblegum through some grand act of guardianship, because Marceline spends the arc transformed into Marshmalline, herself in need of rescue. The rescue, when it comes, arrives from an unexpected corner. In the finale, Skyhook's 2, Lumpy Space Princess, is revealed to be an anti-elemental, immune to the corruption, and she uses that power to reverse the elemental transformations across Ooh, restoring Princess Bubblegum, Marceline, and the Candy Kingdom to normal. The one character who has always sat slightly outside every system, too lumpy to belong anywhere cleanly, turns out to be the only one the elemental magic cannot touch. Her not fitting becomes the cure. So if there is a role reversal in this chapter, it is not the tidy one where the cold vampire becomes the warm defender. It is stranger and quieter than that. Both Bubblegum and Marceline are reduced. Both are made into distorted versions of themselves, and both are returned to who they were by someone else entirely. What the miniseries actually dramatizes is not one of them saving the other, but the two of them enduring the same violation side by side. The candy one made into architecture, and the vampire one made into sweetness, and then both being given back their real selves at once. There is an intimacy in that shared restoration, the two of them made normal in the same breath, that the story never has to state out loud, and the arc does not let everyone walk away unchanged. At the end of Skyhooks 2, Jake's appearance is shown to have permanently changed, more closely resembling the shapeshifter, his biological father. As a lingering effect of everything that happened, most of Ooh is restored. The transformations are reversed, the princess is freed, the kingdoms returned. But one body keeps the mark. The show has always been willing to let its adventures leave residue, to insist that you do not pass through something this large and come out identical, and here it plants that residue in Jake, quietly, at the very end. The corruption is undone, and yet a piece of it stays, written into the face of a character who was only ever trying to help. That is the note the miniseries chooses to close on: restoration for almost everyone, and a permanent, gentle reminder for one, that the events were real and that they cost something. There is a song near the end of the third season, in an episode called What Was Missing, that fans have spent years pointing back to. The song is titled I'm Just Your Problem, and Marceline sings it in the direction of Princess Bubblegum. Nothing in it is stated outright. There is no confession, no scene of two people naming what once existed between them, and yet listeners heard something underneath the melody, a wounded familiarity, the particular sourness that only settles between two people who were once closer than they are now. That episode aired in September of 2011, and it is the moment most often cited as the first strong textual hint that Marceline and Princess Bubblegum shared a past. It is also, in a sense, the birth of a word. The ship name Bubline grew out of that song, and it grew years before anyone connected to the show would confirm that there was anything to name. Think about the gap that opened there. The audience arrived at an interpretation long before the people making the show were permitted to say whether the interpretation was correct. That silence was not an accident, and it was not, as it turned out, a matter of the writers withholding a secret for the pleasure of a slow reveal. The silence had an address in the real world, and it had reasons that came from outside the story entirely. Some of those reasons became public in 2014 at a Los Angeles book signing for the Adventure Time Encyclopedia. Olivia Olson, who voices Marceline, told the people gathered there that the series creator, Pendleton Ward, had spoken to her in the recording studio and said, in effect, that of course she knew the two characters had dated. The line she reported him using was direct and almost casual. He told her that they dated, as though it were a settled fact of the world she was voicing, something she should simply understand about her own character. That is a striking thing to sit with. For the actor in the booth, the relationship was established, a given, part of the material. For the audience watching at home, it remained a rumor built out of a single song. Olson did not leave it there. She asked Ward whether the relationship would ever be made official, whether on the show itself or in the encyclopedia that the event was celebrating. His answer named the machinery plainly. He said he did not know about the book, but that in some of the countries where the show airs, the relationship is, in his words, sort of illegal. That sentence carries the whole weight of the chapter. A cartoon distributed across many national broadcast markets is subject to the standards of each of those markets, and the strictest of those standards can set the ceiling for what the series is allowed to make explicit everywhere. The romance was not hidden because the writers were shy. It was kept subtextual because the show was written to pass through territories where making it text could make it unairable. At that same event, Tom Kenny, the voice of the Ice King, added a second coordinate to the map. He remarked that it had been illegal here until 2013, invoking the legal climate around same-sex relationships in the United States itself. The point landed with a kind of grim humor. The pressure was not only foreign and distant, the country producing it had, within very recent memory, carried its own restrictions, and the people in that room had lived and worked inside that atmosphere. A show does not float above the laws and anxieties of its moment. It is written under them, sentence by sentence, note by note from the standards department. To understand what eventually changed, you have to follow a person out of the building. Rebecca Sugar worked on Adventure Time as a writer and a storyboard artist, and the later showrunner, Adam Muto, has credited her specifically with building and nurturing the relationship between Marceline and Bubblegum during her time there. She left the show after the 5th season episode, Simon and Marcy, and she left to create her own series for Cartoon Network. That series was Steven Universe, and it premiered in 2013. So the sensibility that had been tending this couple did not vanish. It walked down the hall and started building a place of its own, on the same network, under the same standards, carrying the same questions about what a children's cartoon would be allowed to say. The turning point, when it came through her show rather than through this one. In July of 2018, Steven Universe aired an episode called Reunited, as part of one of its concentrated release events. That episode contained the wedding of two characters, Ruby and Sapphire. It was the first same-sex wedding in Western children's television animation, and it aired roughly 2 months before Adventure Time reached its own finale. The timing is not a coincidence that the shows arranged between themselves. It is the visible surface of a decision made higher up, inside the network. Sugar later described that decision to the Los Angeles Times, and her account is the key that unlocks everything this chapter has been circling. Once Cartoon Network approved the Ruby and Sapphire wedding, she said, the final decision was made that they would no longer be getting what she called bigoted notes. From that point, in her framing, everything that a heteronormative couple could do on the show, this queer couple could do. And then the crucial extension. She said that it also applied to every other show on the network. The permission was not granted to Steven Universe alone as a special exception. The policy itself shifted, and it shifted across the whole lineup. Adventure Time was inside that lineup. The ceiling that Pendleton Ward had described to Olivia Olson in a recording studio, the one built out of international standards and older domestic law, was raised for the finale to reach through. There is one more voice worth holding here, because it guards against the neat story becoming too neat. Adam Muto, running Adventure Time in its later years, said that the romance certainly was not in the show's original pitch. It was not a master plan smuggled past the censors from the first episode. It evolved gradually, over the run of the series, through the ordinary work of a writer's room returning again and again to the same two characters and asking what was true about them. So two forces meet at the end of this show. On one side, a story that grew organically inward, a relationship discovered in conversation over years. On the other, a permission that arrived from outside, late, after a wedding on a different show, finally moved the line. The song came in 2011. The permission to answer it plainly came in 2018. The distance between those 2 years is the real subject of this chapter. There is a version of the series finale that exists only on paper, and in that version, Marceline and Princess Bubblegum never kiss. Adam Muto, who served as showrunner and executive producer by the time Adventure Time reached its end, has confirmed that the original written outline for the scene did not call for a kiss at all. It asked for something softer and vaguer. The two of them, the outline said, would simply have a moment. Think about how much room lives inside a word like that. A moment can be a glance. A moment can be a held breath. A hand not quite reaching another hand. An ending that keeps its meaning folded up and unspoken. That is the ground the finale was standing on when the scene passed from the writers to the person who would actually draw it. To understand why the ambiguity mattered so much, you have to remember what had been built underneath it, over many years. Muto has been candid that the romance between Marceline and Bubblegum was never charted from the outset. It was not a plan carried in from the beginning and slowly revealed. It was, in his words, a relationship that evolved over time, accumulating across seasons the way a real closeness accumulates, in small gestures and returns, and old wounds that never fully healed. And he has been generous about where much of that groundwork came from. He credited Rebecca Sugar, the writer and storyboard artist who worked on Adventure Time for several years before leaving to create Steven Universe, with building and nurturing that connection in the earlier seasons. So by the finale, the thing between these two characters was not new. It was years deep. It had simply never been named out loud in the plainest possible way, which is what makes the choice at the drawing table so quietly enormous. The storyboard artist assigned to bring the scene to life was Hannah K. Nystrom, And when the ambiguous instruction reached her, she made a decision. She would not draw a glance. She would not draw a hand, almost reaching a hand. She looked at the outline's soft little phrase, that they would have a moment, and she chose to interpret it as directly as it could possibly be interpreted. She drew a kiss, a real one, on screen, between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, with nothing hedged and nothing left folded up. Consider what that requires of a person, to take a sentence written to be safe and answer it with the least safe reading available. She was not adding an event that the story had not earned. She was reading the years of subtext and deciding the moment had finally come to say it plainly. And then she did something that turns this from a production anecdote into a small piece of history. When Nystrom turned in her storyboard for the scene, she added a handwritten note in the margin, right beside the panel where the kiss happens. The note read, simply, "Come on," followed by a large exclamation point. That is the whole of it. 2 words and a mark of insistence, scrawled next to a drawing. It is not an argument. It is not a memo laying out the thematic justification across paragraphs. It is closer to a plea, or a dare, or the sound a person makes when a thing has been obvious for so long that saying it feels less like a revelation and more like a relief. Come on, as if to say, we all know, we have known for years. Let us finally let them have it. The margin note went up the chain to Mudo, and his response has become part of how this scene is remembered. He has stated that his reaction to Nystrom's choice and her scrawled note was, in his words, "I can't argue with that," and he approved the scene as it had been boarded. Sit with the plainness of that for a second. There is no grand declaration in it, no speech about representation or courage or legacy. There is a person looking at a drawing and a 2-word note and recognizing that the case had already been made, silently, by everything the show had spent years assembling. The kiss did not need defending, it only needed permission, and the permission came in the form of a shrug that was really an agreement. What I find genuinely moving about this, and I will call it opinion because it is how the moment of authorship dissolves. We tend to imagine the big beats of a beloved story as decisions made in a room, deliberately, by the people whose names sit at the top of the credits. And some of them are. But this one of the most talked about endings in the show's life, did not arrive that way. It arrived from the middle of the machine, from the desk of the artist actually holding the pencil, in a note that was never meant to be famous. The outline gave her vagueness. She gave back certainty. That is not a small thing. That is the difference between a story that gestures at something and a story that finally says it. The scene the kiss belongs to earns its weight from what surrounds it, and the facts here are worth holding carefully because they are easy to blur. In the finale, Marceline transforms into her monstrous vampire form, drawing on the demonic vampire essence she inherited from her father, Hunson Abadeer, and she does this to destroy a mutated creature. The transformation is not gentle. It is her at her most dangerous, her most inhuman, the version of herself she carries down from her father's line. And crucially, she reaches for that form because she believes Golb has killed Princess Bubblegum. The monster she becomes is grief with teeth. It is what love looks like when it thinks it has lost everything and decides to burn the thing responsible. Then the belief turns out to be wrong. Marceline saves Bubblegum from the monster, and immediately after that rescue, the 2 of them share their first on-screen kiss. Notice the order of it, because the order is the whole meaning. The kiss does not come during a calm scene of confession. It comes on the far side of Marceline, turning into the worst version of herself out of the fear that Bubblegum was gone. She thought she had lost her. She became a monster over it. And when it turned out she had not lost her, the first thing that happens, the very next beat, is the kiss that all those years had been quietly moving toward. The horror and the tenderness are the same gesture seen from 2 sides. That is the scene Hannah K. Nystrom looked at, with its grief and its rescue, and its instruction to simply have a moment, and decided the moment had waited long enough. "Come on," she wrote. And the show, at last, agreed. By the time HBO Max released the second of its Distant Lands specials, on the 19th of November in the year 2020, the question of Marceline and Bubblegum had already been answered on screen once, in the finale that closed the original run. What Obsidian offers is something rarer than an answer. It is a retelling. The special, made by a small team of directors and writers that by most accounts still included Hannah K. Nystrom among its storyboard artists, sets out to gather the whole arc of that relationship into a single hour and hold it up to the light. Olivia Olson returned as Marceline, Hynden Walsh returned as Bubblegum, and the two of them, together, agreed to walk back into the one place the story had been avoiding. Consider the frame the special chooses. When it opens, Marceline and Bubblegum are already a couple, already living together, and that domestic fact is not treated as a triumph to be earned across the runtime. It is simply true from the first minutes. The engine of the plot is instead a bookish glass boy named Glassboy, who seeks Marceline out because a fire-breathing dragon called Malto Larvo has broken loose beneath the Glass Kingdom, and only she can help defeat it. What that request actually asks of her is not courage against a dragon. It is a return. The Glass Kingdom is a place tied to bad memories, to the falling out that once ended things between her and Bubblegum, and so the special's real premise is quieter than any monster. Two people who have built a life together are forced to go back to the site of their worst version of each other. This is why the flashbacks in Obsidian carry more weight than the present-day danger. The special understands that you cannot retell a love story by staying in the happy present. It has to go back, and it goes back in layers, peeling toward the beginning. One of the earliest images it recovers is a young Bubblegum standing in the crowd at one of Marceline's rock concerts. Marceline, on stage, takes off her shirt and throws it into the crowd, and it lands on Bubblegum, who blushes as Marceline winks at her. It is a small gesture and an old one, the kind of charged, half-teasing moment that predates anything they would later have words for. What the special does with that shirt is the sort of move that rewards a long memory. That rock t-shirt, the one Bubblegum catches at the concert, is revealed to be the same shirt she was later seen wearing and trading in the original series, the shirt she used to acquire Marceline's toy, Hambo, in the episode Daddy's Little Monster. Think about what that does. A prop that had already lived a whole life in the earlier show is reached back into and given an origin. The trade that once read as a gesture of care between two friends is retroactively threaded to a wink at a concert, and the two shows are stitched into one continuous history. It is fan service, if you want to call it that, but it is also something closer to a thesis. This was always the same story, and the special is claiming the authority to say so. Then the retelling turns toward the fracture. Obsidian flashes back to the first time Marceline and Bubblegum defeated Malto Larvo together, in the past, and the way it stages that victory tells you everything about why they would not last. Bubblegum approaches the dragon with a calculated scientific method, and it fails. Marceline approaches it with empathy, and it works. That contrast is not incidental. It is the whole difference between them, drawn in a single scene, the princess who wants to solve, and the musician who wants to feel. And here is the detail the special lingers on. Having watched Marceline succeed where her own method could not, Bubblegum does not celebrate with her. She walks away. The victory belongs to Marceline, and Bubblegum cannot stand inside it, and so she leaves. The breakup itself is given to us in another flashback, and it arrives not as a grand betrayal, but as an ordinary argument that goes too far. Bubblegum is trying to set up a force field. Marceline is there. The argument breaks out, and a frustrated Bubblegum tells Marceline to leave. What Marceline does in response is the most Marceline thing imaginable, and the special knows it. She writes and performs a song. The song is Woke Up, an angry breakup song aimed directly at Bubblegum, and it is the song that ends their relationship. There is a hard honesty in letting the end be a piece of music. For a character who processes the world through sound, rage does not come out as a speech. It comes out as a track, performed at the person who hurt her, and the performing of it is the leaving. The special is not finished going back. It reaches past the relationship entirely, into Marceline's childhood, and this is the deepest layer it uncovers. In a flashback, we see her as a small child, traveling alone through a desert in the aftermath of the Mushroom War. Her mother, Elise, was secretly dying, and rather than let her daughter witness that death, she sent Marceline away with a hand-drawn map. Sit with the cruelty and the tenderness braided together in that decision. A dying mother chooses to spare her child the sight of her dying, and the price of that mercy is that the child walks off into a ruined desert alone, following lines drawn by a hand she will not see again. It is abandonment, and it is love, and from the outside, they are indistinguishable. The special places this memory beside the breakup on purpose. It is suggesting, without stating it, that the child who was sent away learned early what it means to be left, and to leave first. That is the pattern the whole special has been assembling. Bubblegum walked away from the shared victory. Bubblegum told her to leave. And long before either of them, Marceline was the one walked away from, handed a map and a direction, and told to go. The retelling is not just cataloging hurts. It is showing how a person becomes someone who sings her anger at the people she loves, and how that person might, given enough years, learn to do something else. Which is what the climax is for. When the danger returns in the present, Marceline sings at Molto Larvo again, exactly as she once did. But the song is different. The first time, in the past, her music was empathy pointed outward at a monster. In the breakup, her music was rage pointed at a woman. Now at the end, she sings a song called Monster. And the song is not anger, and not a weapon. It is self-acceptance. She is no longer singing to soothe a creature, or to wound a lover. She is singing about herself, and about being the thing she has always half feared she was, and choosing to accept it. With Bubblegum's help, and with Glassboy's, the dragon is subdued and resealed. Notice the shape of that. The dragon is not slain, it is subdued and put back, which is a gentler and more honest ending than a kill. The threat under the Glass Kingdom was never really the dragon. It was the past, the version of themselves they became there. And you do not slay a past. You go back to it, you look at it directly, and you seal it, so it stays where it belongs. The two of them do that together, which is the quiet argument the whole special has been making. The empathy that once beat the calculated method, the anger that once ended things, the child's long walk through the desert, all of it resolves not into a wedding scene played for spectacle, but into two people cooperating to close something that was left open. That is why Obsidian works as the show's own definitive account of this romance. It does not merely confirm that Marceline and Bubblegum ended up together. It goes back and explains the cost, the childhood wound underneath the adult one, the concert shirt that becomes the Hambo shirt, the song that broke them set against the song that healed her. It treats a love between two characters in a cartoon with the patience a serious story deserves, tracing it from a wink in a crowd, to a hand-drawn map, to a monster resealed beneath a glass city. And it leaves them where the finale had already left them, living together, only now with the entire history of how they got there laid gently out behind them, so that the present tense they share feels not like a reward, but like something survived. There is a version of casting that reads like fate, and this is one of them. Olivia Olson did not arrive at Adventure Time as Marceline. She arrived as an audition, reading Princess Bubblegum lines, and reading them, deliberately, in a way that was not quite her own. What Pendleton Ward had already heard, and remembered, was something else. On Disney's Phineas and Ferb, she had voiced a character he described in his own shorthand as an emo rocker chick with an evil dad, and that shape stayed with him. So when she performed the Bubblegum lines as a kind of costume, trying on a voice that was not hers, Ward stopped her. He told her, in effect, to abandon the impression and return to herself. No. Do you, he said. And with that instruction he cast her not as the princess she was reading for, but as Marceline, the vampire whose evil dad and rocker sensibility she had, in a sense, already been rehearsing on another network for another company entirely. Consider what that founding moment establishes. The performer was pulled toward Marceline by being told to stop performing. The character that would come to carry the show's deepest ambiguities began with a direction to be less guarded, not more. It is a small thing, a studio aside, and yet it set the tone for how Olson would talk about the role for the next decade, as someone who felt her way into the character rather than constructed her from the outside. That instinct became literal in print. Olson co-wrote a book with her father, the writer Martin Olson, titled Adventure Time, The Enchiridion, and Marcy's super-secret scrapbook. Her contribution was Marceline's own scrapbook, in-character diary pages written as the vampire herself, reaching back into the character's history, including the Mushroom War, that sits at the buried root of the whole series. This is an unusual kind of work for a voice actor. She was not only speaking Marceline's lines as written by others, she was authoring Marceline's private interior, the fragments a character keeps for no audience. Olson said that adding poetry to that scrapbook writing made her feel more connected to her character. Recognize what that means. The poetry was not for the series. It would never be voiced on screen. It existed to deepen a connection that only she would ever fully feel, and that deepening then traveled back, invisibly, into every line she recorded. Then comes the moment that would follow her for years. In August of 2014, at a Barnes & Noble book signing for the Adventure Time encyclopedia, Olsen told a room of fans something Ward had once said to her in the recording studio. He had told her, casually, as a matter of settled fact, "Oh, you know they dated, right?" He meant Marceline and Princess Bubblegum. For a great many people listening, and for the far larger audience who heard about it afterward, this landed as confirmation, the creator himself acknowledging in the booth what the show had only ever framed sidelong. But the same signing carried the shadow that explained the silence. Olsen relayed that Ward had explained why the relationship could not be made explicit on the show anytime soon. In some countries where the show airs, he had said, in effect, it is sort of illegal. That single clause reframes everything about the caution the series showed. The restraint was not squeamishness and not indifference. It was the reality of a program distributed across many national broadcasters, some of whom operated under laws that made the depiction itself a legal problem. The tenderness had to be encoded, kept in glances and songs, and the specific ache of two characters who clearly knew each other too well, because the alternative was not available in every territory it aired. Tom Kenny, the voice of the Ice King, was there at that same signing, and his response cut closer to home than perhaps the room expected. Answering Ward's comment about the relationship being illegal somewhere, Kenny pointed out that it did not require a distant country to find such a law. It was illegal here until 2013, he said. For God's sake. In one line, he collapsed the distance. The legal constraint was not a curiosity of faraway places. It was recent domestic history, close enough to touch, and it hung over the show's careful handling of Marceline and Bubblegum, like a fact everyone in that bookstore had lived through. For a while then, the story seemed clear. The creator had confirmed it in the studio, the law had forced it into subtext, and the voice actor had let the truth slip at a signing. Except Olsen herself later complicated that clean narrative, and did so honestly. At San Diego Comic-Con in 2018, speaking to HuffPost, she reframed her own earlier words. "The thing from a couple years ago," she said, "was me kind of hoping it was that, because I ship them. This is a remarkable act of candor from a performer who could easily have let the earlier version stand as canon." She was telling the audience that her 2014 comments reflected personal hope rather than confirmed fact, that she had been speaking partly as a fan of her own show, someone who wanted the reading to be true, and had perhaps let that wanting color what she reported. It would be easy to treat that as a walking back, a disappointment. I would argue it is the opposite, and that it makes her the most trustworthy narrator of the whole tangle. She drew a line between what she had been told and what she had wished, and she admitted that the two had blurred in the telling. The relationship, in her later account, existed in a space of hope and interpretation held by the very people making the show, not only in the official record. That is a more human truth than a clean confirmation would have been, and it sits closer to how the series actually worked, by suggestion, by feeling, by leaving room. Which brings the story to the moment the suggestion finally became image, and to a detail that says almost everything about how Adventure Time was really made. The written outline submitted for the series finale, Come Along With Me, did not specify that Marceline and Princess Bubblegum kiss. According to executive producer Adam Muto, the outline said only that the two characters have a moment. After a decade of encoded glances and territorial caution, and a voice actor's admitted hoping, the official document that shaped the ending reached for the vaguest possible phrase and stopped there. The kiss came from below the outline, from the hands actually drawing the frames. The storyboard artist Hannah K. Nystrom was the one who decided to draw Marceline and Princess Bubblegum kissing in the finale, and in the margin of her boards, next to that scene, she wrote a note. "Come on," it read, with an exclamation point. 2 words of impatience and permission, scrawled beside the drawing, arguing the case for the thing the outline had left unnamed. The moment that would be read around the world as the culmination of 10 years of subtext was not commanded from the top. It was proposed by an artist at her desk who looked at the vague instruction and decided, in effect, that it was time. Hold those two facts beside each other, because together they describe the whole shape of this relationship's telling. At the top of the process, a founder who told a voice actor in a studio that the two had dated, and a finale outline that would only say they have a moment. At the level of execution, a performer who wrote secret poetry to feel closer to Marceline and later admitted how much of her account was hope, and a storyboard artist who drew the kiss herself and wrote "come on" in the margin. The relationship was never simply handed down. It was hoped into being, encoded around a law, and finally insisted upon, one drawing at a time, by the people who could not wait any longer. There is a particular kind of ending that does not announce itself as a beginning, and yet functions as one. On the 3rd of September, 2018, Adventure Time closed its final chapter with an episode called "Come Along With Me." And inside that closing, the series did something it had circled for years without ever landing. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum kiss. On screen, in canon, plainly, the romantic relationship between them is confirmed for the first time in the history of the series. For a program aimed at children on a mainstream cable network, this was not a small gesture, and the calm way the moment arrives should not disguise how long the road to it had been. Consider how close the show came to not showing it at all. The original script did not call for a kiss. It asked only that the two characters have a moment, a phrase soft enough to mean almost anything, a stage direction that could have been played as friendship, as reconciliation, as nothing in particular. What changed it was a margin note. The storyboard artist Hannah K. Nystrom, working through the panels, wrote 2 words beside the scene, "Come on," with an exclamation point after them, a small private argument scribbled in the space where such arguments happen, and the showrunner, Adam Muto, approved it. Reckon with what that means. The single most cited image of queer confirmation in this show existed, at first, as an urging in the corner of a page, a comment from one artist to the rest of the room, and it survived because someone with the authority to say yes said yes. Muto himself has been candid about how uncertain the ground was. He described the romantic relationship between Marceline and Bubblegum as an ongoing conversation among the crew, something worked out over time rather than decreed from above. The series, he has said, did not set out to tell this story. It grew into it. That distinction matters, because it reframes the ending not as the payoff of a master plan, but as the accumulated result of many smaller choices, many people leaning in the same direction across many years, until the leaning became a fact. And the years were real. The first hints of romantic subtext between the two characters appear in an episode called "What Was Missing," which aired in late 2011. 7 years separate that first suggestion from the kiss that confirmed it. 7 years is most of a childhood. A viewer who caught the earliest signals as a young child would have been near adulthood by the time the show finally said the thing out loud. There is something both moving and frustrating in that stretch of time, and the critic Eric Cohn, writing for IndieWire, caught both halves of the feeling. He called it unfortunate that Adventure Time has to play catch-up with these characters so late in the game, and then, in the same breath, he granted that the ending nevertheless illustrates the extent to which the show has pushed beyond the conservative boundaries of mainstream entertainment. Both things are true at once. The lateness is a real limitation, a mark of the caution that surrounded the subject. The reach past those boundaries is also real. A lesser show would have managed neither. What happens after an ending is often where its meaning is decided, and here the story does not stop at the finale. In the years that followed, the relationship that took the original series a decade to state became a subject the franchise could build on openly. The special Obsidian, released across 2020 and 2021 on HBO Max as part of the Adventure Time Distant Lands miniseries, is centered on Marceline's backstory and her romantic history with Princess Bubblegum, where the original show approached the relationship through subtext and, at the very last, a single kiss. Obsidian takes that same relationship as its foundation and expands outward from it. The thing that once lived in a margin note is now the load-bearing wall of an entire special. That is a considerable distance to travel, and it is striking how quickly it was traveled once the door had been opened. Recognition followed the work. Obsidian received a nomination for Outstanding Kids and Family Programming at the 32nd GLAAD Media Awards in 2021. It did not win. A nomination that does not become a trophy is easy to pass over, and yet the nomination itself is a kind of record, a marker that an organization devoted to how queer lives appear on screen looked at this children's franchise and judged its portrayal worth naming among the year's best. The absence of the win does not erase the presence of the nomination. Both belong to the honest account. The pattern continued into the next spin-off, Adventure Time. Fiona and Cake carries the relationship forward in a doubled and altered form. It features a gender-swapped version of the Bubbline pairing, Prince Gumball and Marshall Lee, set alongside a version of the Bubblegum and Marceline continuity. And by most accounts, it also includes another openly gay couple woven into the story. The spin-off reportedly earned a nomination in the Kids and Family Programming category at the GLAAD Media Awards around that same period. Notice what has shifted between the two nominations. In Obsidian, the queer relationship is the heart of a special, still tied closely to the original series. In Fiona and Cake, several years on, the franchise is comfortable enough to refract that relationship through alternate versions of itself, and to place a plainly named gay couple within the same world, and to be recognized for it again. The conversation Muto described has become something the franchise no longer needs to hold in the margins. Set these pieces beside one another and a shape emerges. A subtext planted in 2011, a kiss in 2018, that almost was not written, saved by a note and an approval. A critic who found the timing late and the achievement genuine in the same sentence. A special built on the relationship, nominated by GLAAD, though it did not win. A spin-off that carries the pairing into new forms and earns another nomination. None of these facts, on its own, would carry the weight that people assign to Bubbline as a landmark in queer representation in children's animation. Together, they explain why the assignment holds. The importance was not the single kiss. It was the willingness, sustained across years and across shows, to keep returning to the same two characters, and to say a little more each time than had been said before. That is the quiet argument the record makes, and it makes it without raising its voice. The love story of Marceline and Bubblegum is not a single confession delivered in a final season. It is the slow accumulation of small gestures across years of a children's show that was never supposed to be able to say what it was saying. Two people who hurt each other, who lost each other, who kept the rock shirt and the drawings and the memory of a shared apocalypse, and who found their way back not through grand declaration, but through the quiet decision to stay. Think about what it took for a program like this to exist, to smuggle a story of grief and forgiveness and adult love into 15 minutes at a time, and to trust that the children watching would grow into the people who understood it. The show never rushed. It let the feeling arrive the way real feeling arrives, sideways, in the space between what is spoken and what is finally done. And so what remains, after everything, is not the argument that they belong together, but the picture of it. Two women on a rooftop above a city that has already ended once, one of them immortal, one of them ancient, both of them tired, sitting close enough that the centuries between them go quiet, the sun going down, nobody watching, nothing to prove, just the long ease of two people who have finally stopped running from each other, letting the evening settle over them like a blanket pulled up in the dark. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.